who's just publishing in a lot of ways is more helpful to other aspiring writers because you're in the trenches doing it right now. I sell a book by saying, I'm Brandon Sanderson, right? That's not a publisher. I assume it's kind of the same way. Like, at this point, I am my own brand, but that's an advantage and a disadvantage, right? Because I don't know how it is to break in right now in the new kind of indie publishing world and things like that. So I think you will have lots of useful things to say for people because you're doing it, you know, the way things are happening right now.
Well, and you mentioned your name. The UK was so excited about Skyward. Like, it's got Brandon Sanderson novel with Skyward and the gorgeous white-orange tone cover. And then, oh, by the way, this is a Brandon Sanderson book. So I understand what you were meaning by brand. They're super excited. Well, we're all really excited. Yay, Missy!
Yay!
Don't say she doesn't know how to make an inference.
Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who don't know, this is Mercedes Lackey, one of the most prolific fantasy.
Usually it's my husband that's late.
All right, so we've had intros and we are excited, and many of us just love to geek out about a good magic system. Whether it is in a board game, a card game, or in books, as many of us on this table are writers, we love a good system. We also love to take apart a bad system. So, that being said, we'll start out with Mercedes because I'll just put you on the spot. What's a magic system that's inspired you?
Oh, God. Most of the ones that were inspired me were bad, so I'm not going to say anything about the authors that came up with them. So, my main inspiration was just that bad magic systems. I wanted to do something much better. Logic, rules, no free lunch. The MacGuffin does not save the world in the end. Vulcan's the only one that can make that work, and he's been dead a long time.
I don't know, I've MacGuffined on purpose.
Okay.
Just to see if I can pull it off.
All right, that's fair.
Well, and there's the rule of awesome, right, Brandon?
Yeah, the rule of cool. I always, for me, a great magic system is one that fulfills your goals as a writer in your story. And they fill lots of different holes, and they all don't have to look the same. They don't have to do the same things. This is more for me about, when I pick up the book, is the magic in the world enhancing the type of style of story it is, the subgenre it is, and that sort of stuff. Though if we're asking what magic systems have inspired us, I will say I still think the best magic system in fantasy is the Rune Lords by David Farland.
Well,
you know, I'm a lot like Mercedes in that when I started doing it, I started looking at the magic systems and I thought, you know, these are all just ripped off from mythology from most of the other writers that I liked. And it came to me that I thought, you know, I'd like to invent a really cool magic system. So that was sort of my goal in the Rune Lords and future things that I'm going to do too.
this is the third time it's been said, but I'm going to say it. I actually, for those of you who know, did not start out as a fantasy writer. I'd actually written science fiction, and strictly science fiction, for 20 years before I ever wrote a fantasy. And the reason I wrote a fantasy was the fact that I couldn't find a magic system that was anywhere decent. And I made the mistake of saying so at Baldicon. And got short. I won't say I got booed, but it got very quiet in the room. And so I decided I'd write The Magic of Recluse. And I'd already been writing professionally for 20 years at that particular time.
Weren't you an economist before that as well?
Yes.
I'm sure that has nothing at all to do with the way you approach magic.
It has a lot to do with the way I approach magic, unfortunately. I differ from Brandon in one respect. For me, the magic system is part of the infrastructure. It's not cool. It's not fancy. It just is a structure under which everything else in that society is part of that society. It has to fit with the economics. It has to fit with the technology. And it can never solve any problems by itself. It simply is a tool. And I'll give you 2 more sentences on this. One of the things that human beings are, we all are, there are only 2 things that are important to any of us in terms of an object or a system. It either is a tool and makes life easier, or it entertains us. And if a magic system doesn't do one of those 2 things, it doesn't have any place in your society.
I was going to say, I actually was telling these guys a story before I came here as far as inspiration. The very first time I designed a magic system was about 9 years ago. I was a new writer at that time. I'd only written urban fantasy, where I could just kind of hand wave the magic. But I was on a panel at LTE with, ironically, these 3 guys right here. And a college student in the audience had a question, and he asked, and I don't remember what the question was, but I thought I had a good answer. I was the new guy, but I started answering his question, and he stopped me, and he goes, no, you're just an urban fantasy author. I want to hear from the epic fantasy authors. And I was like, you bastard. And so I was kind of, he wasn't rude about it or anything, but I didn't know who this guy is, but I sat there and I'm like, well, okay, well, fine. So as soon as the panel's over, I snagged these guys before we could walk out. I was like, quick guys, like, what are the rules of what makes something an epic fantasy? But part of it is started talking about like magic system. And so I actually brainstormed the novel Hard Magic. I think one of these guys said something about, we need a hard magic system. I was like, that's a great title. And I brainstormed it on the way home just to spite some random college students. So influentially, specifically, was these 3 dudes, which is ironic. That was 9 years ago, and now we're all old.
Well, I think it's really interesting that Larry keyed on the word hard.
It made a great title, because I actually wound up sitting in the 1930s, so it was like a pulp superheroes thing is what it turned into. Yet it was a great title. But yeah, I think it might have been you that said a hard magic system versus soft magic.
It actually was. I remember talking to you about that, though. You're actually really good at what I was saying earlier across all of your books, which is I really think that there is a place for all kinds of magic systems, including you say, oh, it's just urban fantasy, we just hand wave it. There's no just there. That magic is in service of the type of story you're telling, and the type of ambiance you want to get, and the type of subgenre you want to get. And in some of those stories, a magic system that comes to the forefront and takes away from other things you're doing, other types of world building, might be misplaced. And so there's not one way to do this. There might be one way for you to do it the way you like it, right? Like Lee's not wrong to say, I want a magic that does this, this, and this, because that makes the type of story that Lee really likes to tell work in a book.
In other words, I write realistic fantasy, and these guys just spin it off everywhere else.
That's right. And a lot of times we talk about doing hard magic, where we do have a magic system where we know what the rules are, we know what the consequences of the magic is going to be, we know where the power comes from, and very often the system is broken, damaged. But if you look at something like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, the Ring had a hard magic system, but pretty much everything else in there is all hand-waving. And
it works real well.
And it works really well.
Because
Yes.
he was a great writer.
Let's see, where are my Harry Potter fans at? So that's a good example of a soft magic system.
Harry Potter is a really interesting example, though, because it tends to be in a given book pretty hard, and then across the entire continuity it lets itself be soft. And so what you end up having is a given book is really tight with the use of magic. Though again, I don't know if you want to get into this, but there's when we talk about a hard magic system, there are many things we mean. And I think as a writer it's good to separate out internal logic versus external logic. If you want a hard magic system. Lee likes the external logic to really work, meaning you're asking, where is the power coming from? How is it realistically affecting the economics? How can I explain to someone outside the system how this magic is actually working? How does it not violate the laws of thermodynamics? And internal logic means that it's consistent. right? And so, for instance, you can look at a lot of superheroes as good examples. Some superheroes do not try external logic. They just say, this person has this power, and it works this way. The further they've gotten along, the more external logic they try to add. Oh, it's the X gene, or it's, you get the power from the sun, or things like that. That is a very different thing from the internal logic of the story, where you say, this character has this power, it works in this way, and it always works that way. We don't explain how realistic it is, but we are consistent. Two very different things, both very important to think about for your story, but you can have a story with only internal consistency, and Harry Potter's pretty good at this. She doesn't tell us, oh, where does the power for magic come from, and what are the laws of things. No, but it can be very consistent, particularly within a given book, internal logic.
Well, and even in that series, it's like one of the 4 elements. It's no different than air or water, or it's
Right.
just something that flows out of the system, out of the world around it. So we sort of briefly glanced over breakdown in costs in magic systems. I'm of the firm belief that when it comes to a magic system, as long as it serves the story at large, you're good. It's awesome to have this amazing world build with more layers than we would ever know what to do with in a lifetime. But at the end of the day, if you don't get the story down on the page, I feel like you're doing yourself a disservice. But that being said, breakdown in costs. What in a magic system, what do you guys love to see? Do you want the magic to be extremely costly? Like you cast the spell, it takes your life? Or what do you like to see when you're building a system?
A lot of cost. But there are 2 levels of costs here. One of which is, and being the economist that I was trained as, I gotta bring this up. You're not going to have a workable or usable magic system in any society unless you can monetize it. I know that sounds odd, but basically, we only pay for something that does something or something that entertains us. And I'm big on monetizing the magic system. A lot of people who do magic and a lot of stories, but they don't get paid for it. Well, I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. The other question, of course, is the cost of the character. And I guess the way I would take it is this way. Every talent anybody has is paid for, one way or another. Magic would be no different. And the greater the talent, the greater the burden is going to be on the individual. There's a reason why most geniuses end up either broken or having been run through the mill. Because that talent is paid for by what society will and won't accept. And I don't think a magical system would be any different. And I've said way too much.
Well, an example that comes to mind is Harry Dresden in the Dresden Files.
Except he makes the same damn mistake from book to book. He never learns anything.
That's the fun of Harry, because you're like, oh, here it comes. But it's the perfect example of someone who's like, I'm a wizard, but I've got to pay my rent. We've got to feed Moose somehow.
What we said as far as cost, in one series, Epic Fantasy, I took this specifically from something I heard Lee say on a panel many years ago, and so I tried to integrate magic into the economy. And so in this one system I had, where magic had basically 2 different sources, one of which was extremely powerful but not renewable and rare, and so it cost accordingly, and the other one which was renewable but extremely dangerous to get, so also expensive, but you could use it. And so it's interesting, and it's also in that same book, just because it's something Lee said, he said one time, I've never seen a fantasy world realistically use fractional reserve banking. So on a challenge, I did specifically do that.
I'm glad to be an inspiration there.
That's something that anybody who's not an accountant or an economist just does not give a crap about, but we thought it was awesome.
Korea's school of writing is challenge accepted, basically.
One of the things that I always find fun with magic, and it's not necessary, but if you have a magic system that's nailed down too much, it becomes an alternate science. And when that happens...
What's wrong with that?
When that happens, very often what happens is the storyteller then starts trying to figure out, okay, how's my hero going to learn to master the magic before the villain does, or better than the villain? And so it becomes kind of a foot race. And there's other ways to handle that problem, but that's the most common way that's handled. But I like magic systems that get broken. You know, when a spell goes awry, or the source of magic suddenly is lost. And so when Brandon Sanderson turned in his book Elantris, and I read it for the first time, I was really pleased by the way that Brandon handled that.
1999 in Dave's class at BYU.
I read his first chapter and I said, keep writing this way and I'll give you a cover quote for the book, and it made him the class. And he did. So.
And he did.
And then when the book came to tour, David Hartwell gave it to me to read and said, give him a quote.
It actually meant a lot to me, Lee, when you put it, because you don't remember this, but before I broke in, I once was talking to you at a convention, it was World Fantasy Convention, and I just said, what advice do you have for new writers? And you said something that's always stuck with me, which is you said, one of the very few things you have that has any worth is your name. Only use your name sparingly, and use it on things that you legitimately believe in. If we're talking about economics, there's like a certain economics to the power of a name and an endorsement, and when you actually gave me one, I was very appreciative.
Lee has this way of saying really brilliant things just sort of quietly, so listen closely. I remember I got stuck on a novel once, and I was out talking to Lee at lunch, and I said, I got this problem in this book, and it was about my 28th book or something like that. And Lee says, oh, that's easy to handle. And I had been stuck on it for like 3 months. And then he said, oh, this is the answer. Sometimes there is no answer. Sometimes your hero has to keep going on, even if they don't know how to win the battle. And I was like, yeah, okay. I said, how did you come up with that so quick? And he says, oh, I ran into that on my 21st book.
I also ran into it in 20 years in politics, where I found that sometimes there is no answer.
I just finished my 20th book, so I'll be coming to you guys for advice.
Sometimes that's what makes a hero, is they keep going when they don't know any way through.
Yes, absolutely. I think it almost has to be that point,
The always lost point.
Yes.
Point of no return.
I'm going to take a riff on what Misty said because I think it's important. Except I've had a senior moment and I have no idea what it is.
I'll say something around economics. I am not an economist like Lee, and I'm not an accountant like Larry. But I've done some enough research on this to be dangerous, just a little bit of research, right? And I found two kind of fundamental theories that have always been very useful to me in building a magic system if you want to relate it to your economics. And there are two different theories that people talk about, the basis for an economy. And one argument is the economy is kind of run by those who control the food sources. And if you can relate your magic system to the food, that can be transportation, getting food from one place to another. Because if you can get food unspoiled to a large city, you can urbanize and things like this. But they kind of look at the idea of food running countries. And the other direction that people go is violence running countries. The people who have the monopoly on the violence in society are the people who are in charge of that society. And they're both very interesting ways of looking at the economics of society, and then relating your magic to that. There's a reason why in the Stormlight Archive I said, all right, I'm going to make the magic have a one-to-one, like you can correlate it to how much food the magic can create. This lets me understand, using some real-world examples, how to move armies around, how much magic we would need to keep the army fed, which also kind of ties into the monopoly on violence in society and things like this. But I wanted to relate it in that way because it gave me a way to correlate. This much magic is worth this much bread. This much bread is worth this much in our world, and obviously you can't exactly tie it one-to-one, but it gives me a ballpark so that I can kind of keep a scale going and I can know how much value these things have. Obviously scarcity and ease of creating that food and things all play into how this works. It's not exactly directly across, but it's been really handy for me in figuring out how much is my magic worth.
So, I was sitting in a panel once, and someone actually asked Brandon, what was the last time you saw a magic system that just made you go, whoa? And I'd like to give everyone a chance at the table to talk about that. I think on that one it was Brian McKellen, and he has this just absolutely fantastic gunpowder system that the magic works through. And it's awesome. So what was the last system that you guys read that was like, wow, this is impressive. This is a magic system I can sink my teeth into, and I really love what the writer's done.
Foundry Side by Robert Jackson Bennett has a really excellent magic system, and it just came out. That book just came out. It's very good. The other thing that kind of wowed me was not a book. It was Doctor Strange. The way they used magic visually. I'm like, oh man, that's what I want them to do in my movies. They got the rule of cool down on that. It doesn't make any sort of external logic sense, but I had a blast with that film.
Actually, the one that has struck me most recently is a debut novel by Rebecca Ronhorse, and it's a Navajo magic system. And I found it incredibly fascinating. I'm not enough of an expert on Navajo mythology and magic systems to critique it, but I sure as heck liked reading about it. And I believe it's called To Track the Lightning.
Trail of Lightning.
Trail of Lightning.
It is gorgeous.
She won the Campbell this year, didn't she? Yeah.
But like her coyote, I'm a mythology folklore fan. And every once in a while everyone's like, oh, Coyote's this fun, nice trickster god. I'm like, no, he is not a nice guy. She just nails the characterization of that character. I'm just like, yes, this is how I see Coyote. He's horrid and charismatic all at the same time. But the magic that go read Trail of Lightning, it's wonderful.
Drawing blank. I mean, there's some that I really enjoy, but recently new ones, I'm drawing blank. I've been mostly reading sci-fi lately because of what I'm working on.
Well, even if within sci-fi, there's a way that the science works.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Compare and contrast Star Trek and Star Wars. You have space opera, and then you have the epic tale of Luke going out and taking on the Empire. There's a system and structure. Thank you, Woo fan. I appreciate it. But for those of you who are storytellers in the room, look at how the system and pattern is built. No matter what media you're watching, whether it be reality television, which I don't highly recommend, but if it's your thing, or if it's your favorite novel, look at how they've put it together. And there are things that, as storytellers, we can take away, we can use, and we can make our work, we can take that step further, we can make our work just a little bit better when you get into these things.
You can learn from anything, even bad science fiction and fantasy. And sometimes seeing something that somebody's done that is not good is as useful as seeing something that's good.
Yeah, getting mad because something had an idea and did it poorly can be really fertile ground for writing your own story.
Totally.
Okay, so upcoming magic systems. I'm one of the judges, the lead judge for the Writers of the Future contest. We had a story last year by a fellow named Anish Brodsky, Polish immigrant, who wrote a story, and I'm blanking on the name, but it had a fascinating magic system behind it because it dealt with dragons that live in sort of a parallel universe that send their consciousness to men in order to enlighten and destroy them at the same time. And I'm just in envy of that particular magic system. I thought you did such a brilliant job.
The last time I ran into a magic system that made me go, whoa, was a long time ago. It was what C.J. Cherry did with Rusalka, where magic power is inversely proportional to your age. So when you're young, you have a lot of power, but you make a lot of mistakes, and every time you make a mistake, whatever you were trying to do fizzles. But when you're old, you may not have a lot of power, but everything you do is precise, and you almost always get the result you want. I thought that was pretty awesome.
Okay, so Larry, do you prefer your magic systems to help or hinder? This is a personal preference thing.
I think it depends on the kind of story I'm telling and who the point of view characters are. And so like when I'm writing my urban fantasy stories, I usually write from the perspective of people that are fairly normal. Magic is an outside influence. It's usually bad. Usually if they have magic, it doesn't work out the way they want, so it's kind of an antagonist thing. Different series, I'll write it where they are actually magic users and wizards, and magic's just a part of their life. And so that for them it helps. And so to me, help or hinder just kind of depends on where you're at in the story and just how your point of view characters interact with it. I've had help and hinder in the same book. So I don't know if I have a preference. I just have a preference of whatever makes it for a more awesome story.
Well, since I'm a mechanistic type, for me, it's neutral. It all depends on the user.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yep.
Same here, it's just a tool.
Unless I'm writing a Lovecraftian thing, oh, then it's bad.
Let me amplify that a bit. I talk about power systems in your story. We have political power systems, we have economic power systems, we have military power systems, and magic is just another power system. It's one way that people get what they want. And so when I'm doing it, I just think of it as being something that's neutral and it depends upon the user, as to how they want to use that power.
But magic systems are basically another tool in the toolbox, or
Yeah,
That's pretty much how I use them.
but I want them to be cool tools.
Yeah. It's kind of like you can write a really successful fantasy that has almost no magic in it at all,
Yeah.
or you can write a really successful fantasy that is just oodles and buckets of magic in it, and they can both be really awesome stories. So it's just if you want to use that tool or not.
And you can write a fantasy system that's got oodles and buckets of fantasy that's a lousy story.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this weird thing. I say this frequently. Like, we are here in this room, talking about sci-fi, about fantasy. I mean, science fiction and fantasy, because we like the worlds, right? That's what distinguishes sci-fi fantasy. But it's also kind of the least important part of the story. A story with great characters and a great plot and a weak magic is almost always still a great story. It could be maybe improved with a better magic, but a story that has great magic but weak characters or a weak plot can make a great short story that generally makes a terrible novel. Obviously, you want to be able to do all three, but it's this weird sort of catch-22 where we're drawn to the fantasy worlds, but it also is the characters and the plot that's really going to mean something to us.
75% of my Valdemar stuff has no magic in it. It's all psionics.
Now, when you create a magic system and you're looking at it from the point of view of, is this going to make a great story? I think that a lot of times we don't really see why the magic system is so important or why it's necessary. When you have a story that has one impossibility, one thing going on in it, that's very easy for people to see and to recognize, okay? And so, for example, when Stephanie Meyer was in my class and we talked about whether she wanted to do vampires and werewolves in Twilight, I said, no, you don't want to do vampires and werewolves because it violates the one impossibility rule. And then she says, well, what if I want to have werewolves? And I said, well, you got to save the werewolves till book 2, and you can, because then people will be sucked into your world. Well, whenever you create an alternate world, it gives you all sorts of opportunities to create magic systems, hard and soft. And that's why we get into alternate worlds in our fantasy so much, And I think that if you really want to master creating a strong sense of wonder, learning how to write an alternate world that has a lot of wonder in it is really important.
On that, what Dave said there is really important in the writing process. When you come up with this new magic system or this new magical idea, start asking questions about it. If this exists, then what? If this happens, then what would that cause? And you'd be surprised how many story ideas, when you start creating this world, how many story ideas will spiral off of just that one change that you made.
Yeah, and that's really important. I always like to say that you want to think at least 3 levels deep. And by that, what I mean is that when you create a magic system, you go, oh yeah, this is obvious that this is going to happen. And then you have to think about it a little bit more and you go, this is less obvious that this is going to happen. And then you get thinking about it deeply and you go, this is a total surprise because people aren't going to be thinking about this, right off the surface of their brains.
You can write whole books off of spinning stuff off that. Like I have this big diversion in the second novel of sequel to Son of Black Sword called House of Assassins. But I had where magic is something that actually is harvested from demons. Like you can kill a demon and harvest its parts for magic. And so there's actually like an entire economy built around that. But also one of the cool things is I started having this subplot about illicit, illegal underground magic smuggling rings, where these people traffic in demon body parts. And it got all these kind of these really cool little elements in the story that I didn't even think of in the first book. Is because of asking questions like that.
There's a thing in improv where you go yes and. It's you don't shut yourself down, because if you shut yourself down, you don't know where that path could go. So it's always very helpful where if you're like, okay, so if my magic system does this, well, yes and. And even with building characters or building plot, okay, if this is where the plot's going, what else can it do? It's incredibly helpful, especially when initially building a magic system, world, structure, character, or if you're a writer, it's helpful.
Yes, the yes and question helps you broaden the story and think of things that you wouldn't have thought about, but then you can also say, but what's really going on? You know, get deeper and deeper and deeper. So you can deepen the story too, and not just look at things that spin off, but also look at your underlying premises and what that really means to individual characters.
Well, that's Ted Sturgeon's ask the next question.
Yeah.
Because you never assume that when you have an answer, it is the answer.
That's right.
Also,
You have to ask the next question.
also, there's one side of it that nobody's talking about, and I will relate a very quick anecdote on this. I sent one of my early short stories, and some of you know I was not the most successful short story writers in the beginning. I sent it off to Ben Bova, and he sent it back to me with a comment. The gadget you postulate, toss off so easily in the second paragraph of the first page invalidates the whole technology of the rest of the system. Sometimes when you ask those what-if questions, you better ask the question as well, how does this relate to everything else I've done? Because you can cut your own feet right out from underneath you if you don't follow those implications far enough.
Though I will give one of my standard caveats, one of my standard warnings is, you can't do everything in every story. And this was overwhelming to me when I started off as a writer. I would go to panels like this at conventions, and I would hear them talk about the economics, and I would hear them talk about the history, and I'd hear them talk about you need to know architecture so you can have correct architectural feel, and you've got to build your language as well. And you better ask the next question on this and this and this, and suddenly you feel like you've got to fill 7 volumes of notes before you can write a story. Well, if you want to do that, that's fine. You know, that's what Grandpa Tolkien did, right? But I'm going to tell you, you can't do everything in every story. And usually a science fiction or fantasy story is better when you take one aspect of the world, kind of like Dave's Law here, changing one thing, taking one aspect, saying, I'm going to dig really deeply into the religions of this story and look at the implications of them and go deep into a concept rather than trying to do 5% of the work on 500 different world building topics. Obviously depends on your subgenre and how many words you have to play with, but try to do one thing well or a couple things well, and that will be more engaging. Don't worry that you don't also know the languages and know this. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to write a book in a timely manner. You'll write one book every 40 years.
I call that starting small. You start small and build out.
It sounds silly, but I save all those notes because, just because I ask a question and I know what happens in the world doesn't mean I'm going to put it in the book, because that might be boring. Like I said, fractional reserve making, I'm not going to put a paragraph in there because that would bore the crap out of most readers. But I save all this stuff for the notes, and then I give them to the RPG designers later when I sell it to them.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna take this in another aspect. What Brandon said was absolutely correct. You can't do everything in every book. But as an author, you have to create the illusion that you do everything in every book. So basically, if you concentrate on one main thing, as was suggested here, and then there are teeny little bits of architecture, teeny little bits, a line from a song, teeny little bits, a monument in a corner. You create the illusion of a complete society, and it's bolstered by the solidity of the one thing that you're concentrating on.
Yeah, Lee is right, absolutely. Oftentimes, a few small details in the right place, if you get absolutely right, will invoke the larger system, and the reader will trust you on that. And you don't. I often tell my students, people often would tell the story about you want your world building to be like an iceberg, right? That if they, most of the iceberg is underwater, you don't put it all on the page. I tell them that's not actually true. What you really want to do is you're going to have a hollow iceberg that they think is a giant iceberg under the water, but you don't often have the time to do all that. You just have to evoke the feeling that they, standing on that iceberg, feel, wow, 70% of this is just not ending up on the page, but I believe it's there.
As I said before, there's a lot of illusion in successful writing. You have to create that illusion because nobody can create an entire world and keep it within even Brandon's word limits.
Well, I can actually give a concrete example of that. When I did Sacred Ground, I did a lot of studying of the Osage and Osage mythology and Osage magic. And I have a lot of friends that are Native American in the area. And when it was out, one of the medicine chiefs came to me and said, "You've given away all of our secrets." And I said, "I have not. I absolutely have not." He said, "Yes, you have. You've done this, and this. You've done all our secret ceremonies." I said, "No, I absolutely have not." And I happened to have a copy in the car, and I brought it out, and I said, "Okay, show me on the page where I did this." And he couldn't because I hadn't. But what I'd done is put in enough of the key stuff that his mind filled it all in.
One of the things that Orson Scott Card once said that's always stuck with me is that when you write a science fiction or fantasy story, the idea, if you try to explain it to somebody, always sounds stupid. Contrary to that typically the better the story is, the more stupid it sounds. Because it's an illusion. You create that reality and that illusion, and if you've got a story that quite frankly is based upon ideas that people would never think about or explore logically, then all of a sudden it just allows you to do something that really creates a strong sense of wonder. It's kind of similar to that whole Pixar thing where, if you've got a story and you've run out of possibilities of what can happen, put in something impossible. It works like that.
Okay, so Larry, when you're building a system, when do you know it's time to stop and start writing?
Oh gosh, and this is not just building a system, this is any research. Because I see people who fall down this rabbit hole all the time where they come to me like, yeah, I've been working on my a book for 3 years, and I've been doing the world guide and the maps and the languages and the magic system. I'm almost ready to start writing. It's like, oh, that's stupid. Actually, start writing them immediately. The beauty of a word processor is you can go back and you can fix the stuff that you changed later. I say don't let anything hold you back. When I plan a new book, I spend a couple weeks tops doing outlining and that kind of thing, like detailed plot outline, before I jump in. Now that process of research and development continues well for the 4 to 6 months I'm actually writing the book. I'm going to keep doing that, but I don't hesitate. Plus, as I'm actually writing the book, I'm going to be coming up with all those cool questions that we were talking about earlier and all the ifs and the what now, that kind of thing. Don't hesitate. Any time is too long.
If I can't finish a 20 to 40 page outline inside 3 weeks, I'm overthinking it.
When I did
These guys take a lot longer than I do. I only spend about a week or so on that first part.
Well, but my 2 weeks is mostly spent mini painting.
All right, you win.
So when I create a magic system, I usually spend about 2 or 3 days creating a magic system, and then I spend the next 4 weeks maybe plotting, and then I start writing.
Yeah, it's the outline, and the outline has the magic system in it.
Exactly.
So,
And
I'm actually working on the book for those. I'm just doing the short form version of the book
Yeah.
in that 2 to 4 weeks. Yeah.
And also, you have to find what works for you. I had friends who were very like, I'm a discovery writer, I'm structured and I outline everything. And for me, what I found works best is a hybrid system. So I'll have a general outline of this is where it's going, and then my characters figure out how they're going to get to the different points that I want to happen in that story.
Okay, I'm going to interject something here. I want to re-emphasize what Eric has said. It's what works for you.
Yeah.
I think, even including Misty, I've been at it longer than anybody in this panel, probably
Yes,
anybody in this room. And I know a tremendous number of writers, and I can honestly say I don't know any two writers who write exactly the same way. The simple rule is, if what you're doing works, just improve it. If it doesn't work at all, change it. But it has to work for you in the way you're doing it.
Last I heard, David Brin was still using his technique of writing the whole book, locking the manuscript in a drawer, and writing the whole book again. Personally, I think that's insane, but it works for him.
Kevin Anderson has a cassette tape, and he climbs mountains while talking, while narrating the book, and then he gives it to a typist.
I will say this much about David Brin. That's why he only produces a book every 6 or 7 years.
I'm getting the 5-minute warning, even though I'm sure we could all sit here and chat for a while, and it would be fun. It really would. But we're going to give everyone a chance to say, hey, this is what's coming up, this is where my signings are, or these are the next panels, and then we'll probably have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions. So, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, okay. I have a signing upstairs in room 255. Let me double check that. 255A. I'll be there every evening. Tonight's 8 till 9, and then tomorrow 7 to 9, and then 7 to 9. After that, I have a booth, 11:30, that has leather bounds, t-shirts, posters. Some of that stuff will be for sale at the signings, also in my room. My solo panel is on Saturday, and I believe they have me in the big room upstairs, so I'll be doing a reading and a Q&A then.
I'm at Bard's Tower, and I'll be doing signings generally at 4:30 or 5:30 in the afternoon, every afternoon. And I frankly have a panel somewhere, but I don't remember where it is on the schedule.
Bard's Tower is 401.
Yeah, Bard's Tower is 401. I'm signing in Bard's Tower also. I'll be there after this. Yeah, and actually, my short story collection, Target Rich Environment, came out Tuesday. I have that there.
I'm in 1700, which is really kind of just across the hall over there, is my booth, and I will be there all day, every day, except for in the panels. So I've got 3 panels tomorrow and a couple on Saturday.
And you also have the RPG for Rune Lords coming
Yes,
up.
I've also got an RPG for Rune Lords that we're doing, and I have a little show special exclusive that's some short stories that are set in my new Rune Lords prequel series that I'm just kind of introducing some characters. Wanted to have some fun with it.
Well, I'm at Bard's Tower also, 401, and I'm there when I'm not on a panel, because I don't like to move too much. And I have the first book in the latest Valdemar trilogy, The Hills Have Spies, and that was out in June. The last book in the Secret World Chronicles superhero series finally came out this month. That's Avalanche, that's there too. And coming up in October is the next book in the Elemental Master series, is the Bartered Brides, which is another one of the Sherlockian ones. Everybody wants you out. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, guys.
Get out of here.
Any of these guys will come to your office, they're signing